Fought in many of the major battles, and on the 7th of October 1916 he's wounded in the leg on the Somme. This requires a period in hospital. He spent some time in hospital at Belitz near Berlin, and he returned to the front in early March 1917. Again on the night of the 14th of October 1918, Adolf Hitler is caught in a gas attack. This leads to temporary blindness. It's while he's recovering from these injuries in hospital at Pasewalk in Pomerania that the First World War ends on the 11th of November 1918. On being released from hospital, Hitler remains in military service, and in 1919 he takes part in a course of political instruction. At the end of that course he is appointed a political officer, an instruction officer. His job is then to speak to groups of soldiers in an effort to put them off taking up any ideas that could be considered socialist, pacifist, even democratic ideas. And it's while he's doing this work that Hitler is given a specific task by his superiors. They want him to go along to the meetings of left and right wing groups around Munich, groups that could be of interest to the army or the authorities. He's told to do this in civilian clothes, just go along to the meetings, listen to what's being said, and then submit reports. In this way the authorities hope to gain some knowledge of what's happening at a grassroots level with these little groups around Munich. So it's while he's engaged in this work that Hitler first encounters the DAP, the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the German Workers' Party. At that time they're just a small one of many right-wing groups. Membership is low, standing at between 20 and 25 people. Going along to the meetings, Hitler finds that some of the views of the DAP are similar to his own views. Hitler finally leaves military service on the 1st of April 1920. After that point, his energies are really devoted to the DAP. Soon discovered that Hitler is in fact a gifted public speaker. He's then addressing the meetings of the group and encouraging new membership. Adolf Hitler will become leader of the party in late July 1921. By then, the party's name has already been changed. It's now known as the NSDAP, the National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And what is it that brings Hitler to this area? Well, Adolf Hitler comes here to the Obersalzberg for the first time in late April, early May 1923. And he comes here to visit a friend of his called Dietrich Eckart. Dietrich Eckart is a writer. He's fairly well known. He's some 20 years older than Adolf Hitler, but Eckart had been a founding member of the original DAP. He quickly became a friend and mentor to Adolf Hitler. Eckart had introduced Hitler to influential people around Munich and helped him develop his early political style. So Dietrich Eckart is here because he's actually hiding out from the police. Eckart is the editor of a small periodical called Auf Gut Deutsch, in Good German. These have been examined, passed over to the police, because it's felt that many of the articles in these periodicals by Eckart are anti-Semitic, and so the police wanted to speak to Eckart about his writing. Dietrich Eckart is aware of the police interest in his whereabouts, and so he comes down here to the Obersalzberg. He's hiding out in a small hotel up here on the mountain called the Platterhof. And he's using an alias. He's calling himself Dr. Hoffmann in an effort to avoid detection. And so Adolf Hitler comes here in 1923 to visit Dietrich Eckart to discuss party matters. Whilst here, Hitler is also using an alias. He's calling himself Herr Wolf in an effort not to lead the authorities to his friend's hiding place. And so Adolf Hitler spent a little time here on the Obersalzberg with Eckart, and he returned to Munich. That first visit to this region made quite an impression on Adolf Hitler. He was very impressed with the natural beauty of the area. Back in Munich, and later that year on the 9th of November 1923, the Nazi Party attempt to seize power in Bavaria, to overthrow the Bavarian state, when they carry out what's referred to as the Munich Beer Hall Putsch, the revolt. That, of course, failed. Adolf Hitler was pursued by the authorities. He's located 2 days later, on the 11th of November 1923, recovering from injuries, essentially a dislocated shoulder, at the home of his friend Ernst Hamstangl at Uffing near the Staffelsee. So Hitler is arrested. He's placed in Landsberg prison to await trial. Trials finally get underway on the 26th of February 1924. Adolf Hitler is charged with high treason. If he's found guilty and given the maximum penalty under the law at that time, he's facing a death penalty. Adolf Hitler is fortunate he has friends with position and influence. One of these, Franz Gärtner, who's then the Bavarian Minister for Justice, this is a man with right-wing sympathies. He uses his influence, and as a result, the 5 judges who are selected to sit on the panel during the trials, these men are also selected for their own right-wing sympathies. And so during the trials, Adolf Hitler is allowed to make what amount to speeches and proclamations promoting the party's ideas. During the trials, he accepts full responsibility for the revolt, claims that his were the actions of a true patriot rather than a revolutionary. And while it goes against all legal procedure, the presiding judge, Georg Neidhardt, he allows Hitler to cross-examine witnesses. Adolf Hitler is finally sentenced on the 1st of April 1924, and he receives a 5-year prison sentence. That was actually the minimum under the law at that time that a person could receive if found guilty of treason. And so he's returned to the prison fortress at Landsberg am Lech to begin serving that sentence. When he gets back there, Hitler finds he's now treated as something of a celebrity. His cell door is left open most of the time, he has the freedom of the prison grounds, and he can receive visitors. During this time in Landsberg prison that Hitler dictates the first part of his book, Mein Kampf. He does this to fellow prisoners Rudolf Hess and occasionally Emil Maurice. They are in prison for the same reason, taking part in the revolt, and they're acting as secretaries to Hitler at this time. These buildings above us on the left, this little settlement up here is called Klausheuer. These buildings constructed during the Third Reich period. In those days their function was to be accommodation for married SS officers and their families, the men being attached here to the Obersalzberg. A couple of those blocks damaged during the air raid on the 25th of April 1945. Those that we see remaining are today owned by the Bavarian state, and they're rented out as apartments to families, local people. The area beside us on the left, parking area, piece of waste ground, call it what you will, once the site of an Italian labour camp here on the Obersalzberg. There were some 16 labour camps dotted around the mountain. At the peak of construction up here during those days, those camps accommodating up to as many as 6,000 workers. There's the Italian camp that was located just in here in front of us on the right. These are all volunteer workers. They're coming from many countries around Europe because there is paid employment to be found here. They're also subject to a voucher system. These vouchers cover their accommodation, their food, even their clothing. So that former SS officer settlement, the married men, coming back into view above us now on the right hand side, Klausheuer. So Adolf Hitler is released from Landsberg prison on the 20th of December 1924, that very same year. His early release is secured by the intervention of Franz Gärtner, the Bavarian Minister for Justice, acting on Hitler's behalf. There are conditions to Hitler's early release, one of these that he will not speak in public. That does not stop Adolf Hitler. He still finds opportunities to address small groups, but he does keep a low profile on that. If he's found doing it, he could go back to jail. And on his release he came back here to Berchtesgaden. He came to rent a small hut on the Obersalzberg, and in there he wrote the second part of Mein Kampf. Hitler dedicated that part of the book to his old friend Dietrich Eckart. Eckart had also been in prison for taking part in the revolt, but he wasn't well, and so he was released early on health grounds. Eckart had come back to Berchtesgaden on his release, and he had died here of heart failure on the 23rd of December 1923. Dietrich Eckart's grave can be found in the old cemetery up in the town of Berchtesgaden itself. When time passes, Hitler learns that an alpine chalet is available to rent here on the Obersalzberg. He approaches the owner, Frau Margarete Winter-Wachenfeld, and she agrees that Hitler can rent the house, and so Hitler rents Haus Wachenfeld in October 1928 for 100 marks a month. And this is an important point in Hitler's life, his lifestyle. Up until this has been something of a nomadic type existence. He has moved around quite a bit. This is Hitler putting down roots for the first time in his life. These three apartment blocks coming into view on the right, this area is called Hinterek. These again built during the Third Reich period as accommodation for administration staff that were required here on the mountain. There were once 4 of these blocks, only 3 today, one of them completely destroyed during that period in April 1945. Those remaining today owned by the state and rented out privately. Now below the road and in here on the right, we see a long white building just in there on the right. And that building was once Hermann Göring's adjutancy. Hermann Göring, Reichsmarshal, head of the Luftwaffe. That building was occupied by General Karl Bodenschatz, a number of other Luftwaffe officers and staff. Bodenschatz himself acting as personal adjutant to Hermann Göring up here on the Obersalzberg. That building surviving the area with absolutely no damage, and again today owned by the state and rented out as apartments. Now looking over there to the right on top of that hill, we can just about see part of the Kempinski Hotel complex up there. It was on that hill to the right, and behind the hotel as we look at it, that Hermann Göring's own home stood. Göring had a home built up there in traditional Alpine style in 1934, quite modest. And Göring is fairly popular with the local people in this area. He has a decent attitude towards people, so he's quite well liked. He's also on that hillside, but over to the left of the hotel, up there, that Martin Bormann's home stood. Bormann bought the home of Dr. Richard Seitz in January 1937. He then had it enlarged and remodeled to accommodate himself, his wife Gerda, and their 10 children. One of those Bormann children dying in infancy, so 9 surviving. Bormann and Göring are neighbours on that hill to the right, but it's fair to say that they hate each other. They really do not get along. It's fair to say that most of the antagonism is on Bormann's part. He is jealous of Göring's position in the party, his long-standing association and friendship with Adolf Hitler, and eventually this is reciprocated by Göring back to Bormann. Bormann is a man who's not liked by the local people in this area. In fact, he's absolutely hated by them. He's a man who's not liked and certainly not trusted even by those in the Nazi hierarchy. Bormann will do everything to ingratiate himself to Adolf Hitler to advance his position. You could argue that he achieves these things, but at a price. He's universally unpopular, but it doesn't really seem to bother him. Now in here on the left there's this little bank, and then obviously a clearing behind going back to those trees over there on the left. It was in there that the SS barracks once stood, a large complex forming a square with a parade ground in the middle. Initially some 300 troops accommodated in there. Later during the war years that number doubling to over 600. SS barracks suffered very heavy damage during the period in April 1945. The ruins removed soon after the war ended. And so Adolf Hitler has rented Haus Wachenfeld. And he eventually goes back to the owner, expresses an interest in buying the property, and so the legalities around the purchase of the house begin in September 1932, but they're not completed with until June 1933. By then, Adolf Hitler, of course, is German Chancellor. He's appointed Chancellor on the 30th of January 1933, and at that point his book Mein Kampf becomes required reading. Hitler becomes very wealthy through the sales of the book, a millionaire in the end, and he buys Haus Wachenfeld for 40,000 gold marks. Hitler will only ever personally own Haus Wachenfeld, later that is the Berghof, and the grounds on which the properties stand. It is the party in 1935 who take a decision to acquire a large area up here. When that decision is taken, the party appoints Martin Bormann to oversee the acquisition of land and property up here. And in those years there was a community up here, a village if you like. For many, many years the Obersalzberg here had been considered an air cure resort. People who were asthmatic, had any form of breathing conditions, ailments, they came here because the mountain air was found to be beneficial for them. So there were a number of small guest houses, small hotels, a church, post office, children's sanatorium, farms, many who'd been in the same families for generations. So there was a community up here. Bormann was tasked with approaching all the landowners, the property owners, to buy them out. and when that was achieved towards the end of 1937, they fenced this area in, an area of about 10 square kilometres, and it was then known as the Führersperrgebiet, the restricted area of the Führer. When Bormann approached people, if they took the initial offer, they did very well out of it. They got an above the market value for their home. They were then offered land down in the valley at a reduced price. Those who dragged their heels or were reluctant to sell found that over a period the offer diminished. And if they still held out and wouldn't move, Bormann in the end sent in a team of men and they took the roof off the house. People have to move out then very quickly and the compensation would have been minimal. Once these properties were vacated, anything that existed in the central or middle security zones, those properties were then razed to the ground, removed. Only those properties that existed in the outer security zone on the lower slopes of the mountain were ever allowed to remain standing. And these are some of the reasons why Bormann is so hated by the local people. He is referred to as the Lord of Obersalzberg because he has so much authority up here. And as we drive down the road, we will slow down a little, and at that point we need to look into this bank on the right hand side and slightly backwards, and there in the hillside we will see a concrete wall with a red steel door set in it. It is not the original door, it's been put in there after the Second World War. The original door was much larger and arched shaped, and that will be coming into view just about now. So looking into the bank on the right, slightly back, and there we see that doorway, and that is one of the emergency exits to the large command bunker, which still stands deep beneath this hillside to our right. Back in those days, the command bunker had the latest in radar technology above hill on the surface and large antennae. The command bunker was receiving information from lookout posts at about a 20-mile distance in all directions, so that this area was well warned in advance of any possible approaching air raids. Below ground they had some very large glass screens, and on those they plotted all air movement throughout the war zones, both Allied and German. And now Hotel Turken over there on the left. A structure of some form or another has stood on that site since 1650. And in 1911 a local man called Karl Schuster bought the Turken Hotel. He and his wife were good business people. They ran a successful inn and guest house there. And so Adolf Hitler becomes the owner of Haus Wachenfeld in June 1933, and soon after that point Hitler decides he would like to add a drive to the house from this mountain road just around the bend in front of us to provide access for vehicles to the house. But that means crossing a little bit of Karl Schuster's land, the fellow who owns the hotel. And so Hitler approaches Schuster, asks him if he would consider selling him a little bit of the land, and explains why he wants it. Schuster considered the matter and got back to Hitler saying, well, no, Herr Reichschancellor, I won't sell you any land. I have a family here, as you don't, and I don't know how much time you might spend around here. But he said you can have access across the land. And so an agreement was drawn up between the two men, providing Hitler with access across Schuster's land and permission to build the drive that he wanted. This was done for just a nominal sum, a small amount, to be renewed annually, and it worked well enough. But then who should get involved? Martin Bormann, thinking maybe he could please Hitler in some way. He bypassed everyone, went straight to Karl Schuster and told him that the party would buy his hotel. Schuster replied saying that he didn't really want to sell. Well, soon after that we find uniformed men standing along the roadside in front of the hotel. They're holding large placards that would translate, "No good German will enter this building." Well, of course, people who would come and spend time and money here stayed away, and those who were in there as paying guests felt uncomfortable and moved out. That, of course, affected business. Still, Schuster held out. He came home one evening to find the hotel filled with SS and SAs singing and drinking. Well, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and fortunately Schuster didn't have the knowledge of what it would lead to, but he passed a remark saying that, you know, I'd be as well to move abroad, I might even go to France. All I find around here now are blacks and browns, referring to their uniform colours. But word of this obviously reached Bormann, Soon after, Bormann had Schuster placed in preventative detention. It was done for 2 weeks. At the end of that period, Schuster had reconsidered, decided he would sell. They settled on a figure of 163,000 Reichsmarks for the property, which was a fair market value. But then at the last moment, Bormann held back on 90,000 of that amount. Schuster was released, and on his release he was required to sign a document stating that he would never discuss how the hotel had been acquired. He was told that he could go home, that he and his family had time to pack suitcases, personal belongings, and leave. They did. Schuster then took a job as a hotel manager over at the Chiemsee, but it didn't really work out, and ill health led to his death within 12 months of leaving. Now, when the Schuster family moved out, the RSD, the Reichssicherheitsdienst, the Reich Security Service, they moved in. And these people were responsible for Hitler's personal safety when he was on the mountainside, and the building and its location proved perfect for their requirements. It overlooked Haus Wachenwald, which stood on the other side of the building. So Hotel Türken was occupied by about 40 men of the RSD and the SS. Time moves on. The Second World War happens, and on the 25th of April 1945 that air raid comes in. Hotel Türken's location means it is damaged. When the war is over, Karl Schuster's widow approached the state. She claims the hotel back, but because the family could prove that Karl Schuster had been forced into the sale, they did get it back. But it took nearly 2 years to achieve, going through legal means. And at the end, the widow was required to pay the state in what was then Deutschmark, the equivalent amount that Bormann had originally paid her husband in Reichsmark to get back. It wasn't really much more than a ruin. It was restored, it reopened in time for Christmas 1952, and is still run by the same family today. It would be Karl Schuster's great-granddaughter Monica who runs it now. The hotel is unique. It is the only building ever returned to the original owners in what was either the central or middle security zones. As we already know, everything else had been demolished. The little sentry post we see in front by the left-hand side of the road, original for the most part. There would have been a gate across the road in front of us there. We are now in what would in those days have been the middle security zone. Approaching here, handing the guard the paperwork if it were in order, he would open that gate and we would pass through to the central zone. Now as we move forward, directly in front of us on the right hand side of the road we see that yellow post, and there's a little trail going into the trees here beside it on the right. This is the trail you would take today to walk to the site of Hitler's little tea house down in the valley at Moos-Lannerkopf. The trail on the left was the later built service road to the east wing of the Berghof, which stood up there in the tall trees. This very overgrown drive here now on the left, just here, this was in fact the main drive to the building. That's the one that caused all the problems for Schuster and Bormann got involved. This hill on the left, the slope, back in those days just a grass covered bank, no trees or shrubs on it. The Berghof sitting up there above us now to the left. And on a clear day, like today, Adolf Hitler could stand up there, look out across the valley and way out through that V in the mountains to the extreme right and slightly back. Way out on the plain we see that long cream-coloured building out in the distance, and that is the fortress in Salzburg in Austria. So he stands here, Chancellor of Germany, gazing across into Austria, his homeland, which would be annexed to the Reich in 1938. And so the Berghof, a very important building. It's in there that Adolf Hitler receives foreign diplomats and ambassadors, heads of state, presidents, prime ministers, members of royalty from many European countries at that time. All these people visit Hitler here on the Obersalzberg in that building. This is a second headquarters during the National Socialist period, second only to Berlin in terms of importance. When he's not in Berlin, Hitler governs the Reich from here. He describes this area as his Wahlheimat, his chosen homeland. In the early years he will spend as much as 6 months of the year on this mountainside. Not all at once, take those periods, add them together, about half the year. He describes in later years that how the early years he spent here were indeed the happiest of his life. He states that many of his great ideas were formed here. And during his time as Chancellor, Hitler will spend 1/3 of that time on this mountainside. More time here, in fact, than anywhere else. This area is so important that in 1936 the party take a decision and they build a second Reichschancellery down in the valley outside Berchtesgaden in an area called Stangas. The building still stands virtually unchanged. The large marble eagle is still in place above the main entrance. Of course the swastika has been removed. Now ladies and gents, we'll be getting off the bus in just a moment, and please take care. You can see that we're getting off on the side of the road where the traffic is coming over the hill towards us here. So please, I would urge you to deny yourselves any sudden impulses to go dancing into the middle of the road. The paperwork in Germany, if we have an accident, you know what they're like for paperwork. It takes forever. So please, straight onto